Hey there, people of the internet, and of course my professor for cis140. I have some JavaScript code here, and I was given a bunch of challenges, and I'm going to code. I've already coded through them, and I'll be explaining the code and what it does. Now, there are 35 questions. I only had to do 25, and I will not be covering all 25. So, let's begin. So for the first challenge, I was given 3 different arrays with a list of names, and this third one is a place. And I had to print them out in order, or in the correct order. So what we did here is we used a for loop. And what it basically does is it does a simple console log. So it does a simple output with my name is, there you go, and it pulls the variable, the value from the first array, the second array, and then third array. And we use I, or the counter for the for loop, as the indicator in position. So what basically ends up happening is I starts off as 0. It then goes to position 0 and pulls out the one in position, the name in position 0. So boom, boom, boom. Right? Goes on to the next step, increments I by 1. So now I is 1, and then it will pull out position 1 from here, right there, and there. It'll then get incremented again by 1, so that'll make it 2. And it will pull out from position 2. So boom, boom, boom. Right? I gets incremented again, and then I is now equal to the length of the array. So last names, I use the last names. It could have been first name or places. But basically, it's now equal to it, and basically it exits the loop. And then you can see right here, here it is right here. Or should I say, here's the output. Right, so for challenge number 2, you have to count up, starting at 1, all the way up to 16, and every time you run into a number that is divisible by 3, you have to replace it with fizz. Every time you have a number that is divisible by 5, you have to replace it with buzz. And when they're both, you have to do fizz buzz. Another very simple one. So we create an empty array right here, an FB for I almost said Facebook, FizzBiz, yeah, not Facebook. And then we use, again, a for loop. And we can use the counter, or the variable I, as the way to increment it. So again, we set it equal to 1 this time, and if it's less than 17, because again, we want I to go up to 16. So if we set this less than 16, it would exit without counting up to 16. So we made the 17, and there's our increment. And then it basically goes through each number and checks, is the number divisible by 3 with no remainders. So if it yields no remainders, it's obviously divisible by 3. It then also checks, is this number divisible by 5? So if we divide it and there's no remainders, it's divisible by 5. If it does, it'll push a FizzBiz or FizzBuzz into the array. Now, if it doesn't meet these 2 conditions, and it's only divisible by 3, again, it'll check 3. So, if you take a number and divide it by 3 and there's no remainders, that means it's divisible by 3. It'll then push fizz. Same for 5. It'll push buzz. Right? And anything else, it'll push that value. And when it's done, cycling through every single number from 1 to 16. It'll check every single number, and then when it hits 17, I won't be less than 17. It'll be equal to 17, and it'll exit the for loop. And then obviously it'll console out FB, which in this case was our array with our numbers. And if we look at our output over here, there we go. So 1, 2, fizz, because 3 is divisible by 3, 4, 5, and it says buzz because 5 is divisible by 5. Again, 6 is divisible by 3, so fizz, and so on and so forth. Now, for challenge number 3, what we had to do is we had to find all the numbers that were greater than 10 and then, greater than 5 and multiply them by 10. So what I did here is I was given an array of numbers, and I created a temp variable, set it equal to 0, and obviously we have a good old-fashioned for loop here to cycle through the array, like we've done in the previous examples. Except what I do is I take the current value of the array. We use the counter to increment it like we did in the previous examples, and we load it into this temp variable here. And we'll explain why it's a good idea to do it in a moment. Right? We then test if that temp variable is greater than or equal to 5. If it is, it'll then take that temp variable, multiply it by 10, and throw it back into the array at the value. And it makes it a whole lot easier to work with, because trying to have an array at a certain value set to an array at a certain value multiplied by 10 doesn't always work out 100%. So by loading it up here previously into this temp variable kind of fixes the problem in a sense. Takes a little more RAM, but that's a topic for another day, right? And then it will increment through and increment through and increment through, and when it's done, it does a simple console log out. So, for challenge 4, this time I was given an object, not an array. And what we had to do is find if one of the keys was found num. Now we know it is, and its value is 5. But we have to code this. So what I did here is this time it's a for loop, but not a traditional for loop. It's a for in loop. And basically what it does, or says in a sense, is you take items, and this is kind of like a temporary holder, if you will. And it will load each item from the object of checkOb, put it into item, and each time you increment, it'll take, so the first time it'll take, in this case, the odd num value and load it into item, then it'll take even number and load it into value, and then found number into value, and then random number into into item, and it will load it into item. So for each item we have to check it. So we have item, and we set it equal to the text string of found num, and obviously if it is, we reference the object, we reference the key, and we set the value to 1. And when it's done and it's checked all the values, guess what it does? Console logs out. And if we look at it, well, here's the output for challenge number 3. You can see everything greater than 5 was multiplied by 10, except for 2, because it's less than. And challenge 4, you can see that odd number holds its value, even number holds its value, but found number, we replace the 5 with a 1. So it works. So now, looking at challenge 5, it's actually almost identical to challenge 4, and the output's very similar. So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of skip over this and move on to challenge 6. So with challenge 6, I'm given an array with integers in it. And what I have to do is I have to find the ones that are divisible by 3 and load them into an object where the key is their position in the array. So kind of to make that a little easier to understand, here's the output. So key 1, it refers to position 1. Now remember, arrays start at position 0. So position 1 has position 3 in it. So there you go, 1, 3. 9 is in position 2, 2, 9. And 6 is in position 3. So how did we do this? We started off by creating an empty object called div by 3, or divide by 3. And there, empty object parameters right there. And we used a simple for loop to iterate through it. So again, there's our I, right? So what we do is we take the first value in the array and we use I as the incrementer. So I starts off at 0, so we take 0. So we take position 0, which would be 4, and we check, we divide it by 3 and we check, is there any remainders? Well, 4 divided by 3 has a remainder of 1, so it fails. And we go on to the next one. So I gets incremented to 1, from 0 to 1. 3, and we run it through. So it pulls out 3, because I is now 1. 3 divided by 3 does not have any remainders, right? So what we then do is we take it and we use this special notation to designate the key. So you can see we have I, which would currently be 1, and then we take the array, which has the value, and we take the value in from that array at position 1, which is 3, and set it equal to this here. So that's how we can get this first one. And then again, we increment. Now I becomes 2. We pull out the 9. We test it. There's no remainders. We do the same thing, and we keep going through the loop until we hit the end. And then of course, at the very, very end, we console out this object, which is this right here. Now, for question number 7, or challenge number 7, I should say, I'm given an object with some values being text and some values being numbers. So what we have to do is I have to take the numbers and separate them from the text and add them together. So what we can do here is we set a total for 0, and then this time we're using a for loop, but it's not a standard for loop, it's an for in loop. So once again, we set items, which is going to hold the current item, and then we have the sum me, which is the object. So what this will do is it'll pull the first object down, which is hello, and put that into items. And then we'll test it. So if we go to the number library and we pull out is an integer, and we, call the array and we say item. So if item, which is hello, the value of it is a number, which, right, add it to total, which it's not. So we skip this. We then go to the next one. So it takes U, loads it into items, and we test it. So is U, or at least the value, an integer? Which it is, or I should say, is a number, which it is. So it's equal to true. So it executes this. So what it'll do is it'll take the value, which is 8, add it to total, which is currently 0, which will give us 8, because 8 plus 0 is 8, and load it into total. And it'll come back up. And then it will take R, or at least the value of R. Again, go through, load it into items, check if it's a number, and it is. So then what we can do is we take the value of 7, right? Total was, last time we ran through it, was 8. So 7 plus 8 is 15. Right? And then again, we increment and increment and increment. We do almost. Almost is not a 10. I'm sorry, is not a number because it's designated as text. Because you can see the numbers are in like a green. The strings or text is in red. So this was marked as right? This one was marked as text. So it is technically not a number. It's technically the string that displays the number 10. It's not the actual value of 10. Right? Then we cycle through, exclamation point, and we keep going, and basically once we hit done, it exits out of this loop and consoles the total. And you can see right here, there's 15. Now, for challenge number 8, what we have to do is we're given a bunch of console logs, and this is sending it to a function called last letter. So we have to build basically last letter. And what it's doing is each time it's called, it's passing a different series of text or a string. So here it has hello, here it has goodbye with an exclamation point, and here it has some other text. So here's our function, and it's actually a very, very simple function. So we have temp string. So what it's basically doing is it's creating a variable here. So when we pass it hello this first time, it loads hello into temp string. The second time, when we have goodbye with an exclamation point, it loads it into temp string. And basically what we do here is, in JavaScript, strings are technically a type of array, which means all our properties we can use on arrays, we can actually use on strings. So what we can do is we can do a console log. So this is what it will return. We can take our temp string, which is our text here, and we can set it up like an array. So we can find the value, and this is basically the value. So we can go temp string dot length -1. So this will take the length of the string. So let's take hello for here. So that's 5 letters. Now you got to remember, with arrays, the first position is 0. So H is in position 0, E is in 1, the first L is in 2, second L is in 3, and the O is which we want, because we want to console out the last letter is at position 4. So once again, we take the length, which is 5 characters, -1, which gives us 4, and then boom, it'll get O. So we get a 4, we take our array at position 4, which is O, and we return it. Same goes for this. Goodbye with an exclamation point is 8 characters, minus the 1, set it to value 7, returns the exclamation point. And again, we could cycle through this. And if you look at the output, there's our O from hello, there's our exclamation point for from goodbye with an exclamation point, and there's our D enter T from the other inputs. Taking a look at question 9, or I should say challenge 9, right? We were actually able to do this with almost like 2 lines of code. It's very, very, very simple. With this, what we have to do is we're giving a number, and we have to send it to a function, and we have to call it, the function is odd. And it will either cancel out if it's odd for true, or if odd is not, it will return a false. And you can see over here we did it because 5 is odd, so it's true, and 2008 is false, so it's not. So our function here, very, very simple, takes the number. So the first one we pass is 5, and it will load it into temp num. So then we take temp num, divide it by 2, and say, is there a remainder of 1? Because think about it. You have an even number, and you divide it. There's going to be a remainder of nothing, because it's even, and it goes into 2. If it's an odd number, it's going to be there's going to be 1 remainder, because the even number is going to go in, and then you're going to have the remainder of 1 to make it odd. So that's basically what we're checking here, and we get a value. So 5, divided by 2, check remainder, does give us a 1. So if this is equal to the value of 1, return it. And this statement is true. So it's going to return a true. And that's why our first value is true for number 9. Now we take 2008 divided by 2 and check it. It gives us a remainder of 0. So 0 is not equal to 1, so it will return false. Moving on. Here in challenge 10, right, we're given two arrays with names in it, and we have to find the one that says droids. So our Star Wars array has droids. Our Thrones array does not. So what we have to do is we have to do a console log, which will turn it out to our output, and we need to call the method droids1, and it will be passing the first array, which is Star Wars, and the second one, which is Thrones. So if we come up to our function here, which is droids1, and then ARR, or for short, basically is the variable that we're going to put these two arrays into for each time we call it. So the first one is going to be Star Wars. And what we do is we set results to an empty string, we set our found to false, and we increment it through with a standard for loop. And what it will do is for each item in there, it'll pull it, and again, we're using I to increment through the array like we did in previous examples. We'll convert it to uppercase to make sure that it still detects. So if somebody puts it entirely in lowercase or uppercase or some mixture of it, it'll still return true for all 3 instances, because guess what? We converted all the characters to uppercase. And then we set it to, is it equal to droids? So basically, if the value in the array is equal to droids, it'll set found to true. If not, it'll just skip it over and found will remain false. So, so if we look at our first one, it'll pass Luke. Luke, all capitalized, is not droids. If we do it again, Finn, all capitalized, is not droids. Rey, same. Kylo is same, but droids, capitalized, is equal to droids. So it'll go down and set it to true. And then here we have our result. And we set it to which we will return, because here's our return statement, return result. So if found is equal to true, that means if it was set here in this if statement, it'll set the result to this string of text, found droids, with an exclamation point. If not, which means it was false or anything else, it'll set the result to these are not the droids you were looking for. And then it will return the result. So when it runs through this, it'll return this, and this will basically, this whole droids 1 Star Wars will collapse to the value of the result, which will either be true, which will end up being true for the first one, because there is droids in that array. So it'll console log out found droids, because that's the value we want it to return from results. Thrones doesn't, so then the next one will be, these are not the droids you were looking for. Alright. Now, we'll take a quick look at 11, but we're going to skip it for the most part. The only difference is, it's the same general code, but instead, we're using a for each instead of a full-on for loop. So we take our for each check for. And this basically will cycle through very similar to the way the standard for loop we had up here would. Right? And you can see it returns the same values. Moving on. Right? Right, so to challenge 12. What this is, what we have to do for this one is we are given a sequence of numbers. It could be any random length, but what we need to do is take it and multiply multiply each number by itself. So 9 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 2 times 1 times 8 times 3. And we need to do this. So what we can do is we use this command here. So we have a spread operator that won't change any of the values, and we'll make a direct copy of this, and we can pass the arguments, which allows us to take in a random amount. So basically, random amount. So what we do is we call the multiply all, we pass it a bunch of numbers, and it loads it into the spread operator with args. So for starters, we set the answer equal to 1, and we'll show you why it's important to set this to 1 and not 0 or undefined in just a second. Once again, we use a standard for loop, and to increment through our sequence of numbers, we set I, and we use it as not only a counter for our for loop, but we use it to increment once again. Now here's where the setting answer, or ANSW, to 1 is important. Because we're multiplying, anything multiplied by 0 will return 0. Anything multiplied by 1 will return itself. So when we pull the first value, which is 9, we need it to multiply against something. So guess what it's going to be? It's going to be 1. So args, which is I, which returns 9, multiplied by 1 will give us answer. We'll set answer to equal to 9. We'll loop back up. It'll pull the next value, which is 4. So then we take args, we load 4 in, we take answer, which was previously set to 9. 9 times 4 is 36. Answer is now 36. And, we keep looping through each one of these. So we'll go, take the number, multiply it by 5, then multiply it by 6, 7, and so on and so forth. Now again, the next line, and when it's done, it will return answer, and then it will console out. So then this whole thing will collapse to the value of answer, which in this case is 362,880. Now imagine trying to do that in your head. Doesn't coding and computers just make life so much more simple? Now, for our next part, it'll do the same thing. We'll take 5, load it in, multiply it by 1. That'll give us 5. Take the next one. So 5 times 5 is 25, which, right, we'll load into ANSW. We'll take the second 5. All right, we'll multiply it in. That'll give us 125 if my mental math is right. Load that into answer, then take our 3, giving us a total of 375. Because then we'll, right? So it'll calculate that, and when it's done, spit out answer. It'll console log, and there's our 375. Moving on to number 13. So what we have to do here is we are given two arrays, and we have to merge them together, and then remove, merge them together. So what we can end up doing here is we technically create a third array, and I called it ARR3, and we'll load it in as a blank, right? So it'll be a blank array. What we also will do is before we do anything, we'll take the length of array 1 and array 2, because we're passing them in as R1 and R2, right? So this first array will go to R1, this second array will go to R2. And if they're equal, we can set them to we can execute. If not, we have a array mismatch. So then what we do is once again we'll create technically a third array, and then we'll run through. Right? So with a standard for loop, and once again we're using I to increment not only the for through the for loop, but we're using it to increment through the arrays. And you can see we're doing R3 push, which will push the value, and we're taking R1, the element in R1, and adding it to R2. Now, because we're adding them, this is why we needed to make sure that the length of R1 and R2 are equal. Because let's just say we didn't have this 8 here. We would have 3 numbers, and then we would have 4 numbers. So when we added the first 3 numbers, that would return okay. But assuming we didn't have this 8, the fourth would have no number to add to. Or again, assuming that we didn't have 8. So that's why we need to make them equal, because you can't add 4 to nothing. You can add 4 to 0, but you can't add it to an undefined value. It's kind of like, say, take 4 and add it to hard drive or add it to drawer. You can't. So again, then your code would give you an error. So to prevent that, we do an if statement. So basically, once we've gone through each element, and we've added the array, and we've added the 2 and pushed it to array 3, or R3 I should say, we will return R3, right? And there you go. There's R3 under output 13, or challenge 13 output. So for 14, what this is designed to do is you're given an array of numbers, and we have to find the lowest number, the biggest number, and their difference. So what we do here is we set a max, a min, and a range. And we pull in, for max, we pull in the first value for max, and we pull in the first value for min of the input array. Because again, we're calling the get the range function, and we're passing it these variables. Well, in this case, this array, which is loading it into this variable called input. Right? So we're going to pull the first digit, which again is 3, and load it in. We're also going to create an output array that is blank. Right? Once again, you're going to see the standard for loop 100,000 times. Right? And there's your I. And we're going to use it not only to increment through the for loop, but to increment through the array. Now, here's why it's important that we took the first value of 3. We have to have a value to compare it to. If we took minimum, and let's just say set these two to 0, well, everything is bigger than 0 here. So our minimum would always return 0, unless if for some reason we passed a negative number. But it makes it weird. So what we have to do is we have to give it something to compare to, which is the first value of 3. And what we'll do is we'll pass it through, and we'll take the value of max, which is currently 3, and we'll compare it to input at I, which in this case is going to be 0. So 3 is not greater than 3, so we skip this. And again, we do the same thing with the min. Min, which is 3, and input I, which is 3, is equal to each other and not greater than. So we'll come back again. So here we go. 20, right, is our next value, because this is in position 1. I gets incremented to 1. So guess what? Our maximum was 3. 20 now becomes this value here, and 20 is greater than 3. So what we do is we take the value and we load it into max. All right. Right? Now again, this fails because our 3 is not greater than 20. So we skip this. And it will cycle through for 39. So, we take 39 is larger than our 20. It'll set max input, to input I, which would be 39. We cycle through for 40. We skip over this for 7 because 40 is larger than 7, so this fails. And 7 is 7 is less than 40, so this fails, and 7 is greater than 2. So this is greater than 3, so this fails. So basically what ends up happening is we come to our 2. This fails because 2 is less than 40. We take our min here, which, if you remember, is 3. Right? We take our 2, and guess what? Our minimum is larger than our input I. So 3 is greater than 2. And then we take 2 and we input it into min. And we'll, run through it for 10. Boom. So that yields us our 2 and our 40. We then take our range, which is our maximum, 40, minus our minimum of 2, gives us 38. And then basically, we take our output array, push the min value of 2, push the max value of 4, push the range of 38. So then we pushed all those values into our output array, and there we go, output. So there we go, YouTube and Professor. That's part 1, where we cover about the first half of the questions. And part 2, guess what we're going to do? We're going to cover the second half of the questions. So, again, if you like this video and want some more computer videos, check out my channel. I've got some good stuff up there. And of course, don't forget to like and subscribe. Thanks for watching, people of the internet, and thanks for watching, Professor.